Good day, colleagues. My name is Marcus Dekener, and I'm co-chair of the SAIEE Load Research Chapter. It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker today. So, folks, this is the man Matthew that sometimes appears in the news and says things that are both alarming and exciting. Matthew is a B.Eng Mechatronics from UCT. He also holds a MBA from USB's GSB. He is an energy expert, fairly long track record at Eskom, management consulting, and he's currently head of public relations and communications at Home Energy. He is also a spokesperson of Home Energy, and he did a master's for his MBA titled Eskom Too Big to Fail or Necessitated Change. And he's an energy expert, and we often hear of him on the news, and that's partially the reason that he's here today. I had a couple of chats with Matthew to talk about the scope of what he was going to present to us, and I told him to be gentle with us because we were just plain load researchers, you know. And we were very interested in what the load was going to do. But Matthew will tell us why the load is going to do that. And Matthew, with that, I hand over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's very much appreciated. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation. I've left a decent amount of time for questions and answers because I realize the things that I speak about and I say are often controversial and stimulate a lot of questions and discussion. So I've left a nice 20 minutes at the end of the presentation for us to go back and review anything. So the process of the presentation I'm going to give today is I'll be taking us through quickly a snapshot of the 5-year load shedding projection, which is usually quite interesting and not really seen that often or presented in the media. I'll also talk about our exciting study that we did of a bottom-up residential solar market sizing to get the total addressable market value. And that's unique information that is not out there and has not been published anywhere as yet. I'll also be talking just briefly about the impact on the demand curve that we're going to be seeing from residential solar getting deeper penetration throughout our municipalities and residential sectors, and then the future of the energy sector and virtual power plants. But the focus of my talk will be on the first two subjects. And yeah, as I'm saying things and you have questions, feel free to jot them down and then leave them to the question and answer session. It might be that I answer the question a little bit later in my presentation, but yeah, happy at any point during the question and answer session to jump back to slides and dive deep into what I'm been presenting and answer questions and hopefully from my side learn, because it sounds like the expertise that's in the room is beyond my expertise actually when it comes to what your focuses are, very much so. So I'm hoping actually to get a little bit of pushback actually, and maybe if I make some claims that are incorrect or wrong, to learn from you. So very much looking forward to a robust discussion regarding the things that I present. And let me, on that note, dive in. So let me share my screen. Yeah, and in terms of my role, so I do work for Home Energy. It's a solar provider, and I'm the head of business, head of public relations now and communications. Bit of a shift in my role recently, and yeah, in my private capacity, I'm a self-proclaimed energy expert, and I'll go a little bit into that, and just to talk about how I got to the place where I am now and who I am to talk to you about Eskom and what's going on with load shedding. So I worked at Eskom for 11 years. Hello to Eskom, fellow Escomites that are here. You're doing good work helping the country. So I applaud your efforts keeping the lights on. I started at Eskom in 2010 and started working at Komati Power Station following my engineering degree, studying electronics and mechanical, but both small scale mechanical and small scale electronics. So it wasn't heavy current and it wasn't large scale mechanical. So it was quite an interesting field that I studied for working at Eskom. And so where I started working was actually in the boiler engineering department, focusing on the process of producing power, the overall process. I was one of the first inductees into the process engineering role within Eskom. And yeah, I started off in commodity power station. Then after 2 years, worked my way to head office to then assist with looking at the process in 4 different power stations. And that's all the way from the coal coming in and the air and the wind, or the wind and the water getting combined, and then all the way out. Not so much focusing on the turbine, but the process of getting the steam to the turbine. And that was for 8 years, roughly. I was an engineer, and the last 2.5 years, I worked as a management consultant, advising the board and C-suite of Eskom on the current and future state of the energy sector. And Escomites that are with us would have heard about initially that the Top Engineers program that now shifted its name to Top Consulting program after a bit. So that's when I joined, and then was absorbed into the strategy department at head office. So that's the department that I was working on as management consultant. And it gave me some really good insight into what is the current state of the fleet, what is the current state of Eskom, and what is the future state of the energy sector. Especially when I then started working in the strategy department under Dana Gampel and Wendy Polton, and the work that they were doing in terms of what will the energy sector look like in 10, 15 years. And I had the opportunity during that time to write my master's dissertation, my MBA dissertation, titled Eskom Too Big to Fail. Thanks, Marcus, for introducing that. Too Big to Fail or Necessitated Change. And I believe what we're seeing now in South Africa is, instead of necessitated change, it's forced change into the democratized energy states, energy sector states, and the unbundling of Eskom. Already unbundling was being discussed from 2015, wasn't really happening, wasn't really making progress towards it happening. And so the dissertation was focused on, why is there a need to unbundle? What is going to happen when we unbundle, and how are things going to go? And already in 2017, 2018, I could tell, and we could tell, that it was going to be a bit of a rough road that we were going to travel. Looking ahead, we thought unbundling would happen in 3 years, but now it's still not there yet. Still waiting for 2 more licenses before transmission can really be truly said to be independent from Eskom generation, and interacting with Eskom generation the same way that it interacts with independent power producers. That's very much a 2-year journey, in my opinion, away to get to that point. But with the virtual wheeling that's coming about, and that's the process now starting to be thought about and implemented, we're starting to see now finally the unbundling and the democratization of the energy sector that was discussed in the 1998 white paper by the governments, as a medium-term goal. Unfortunately, in medium term seem to refer to 20 years instead of 5 years. And what ended up happening is the opposite direction was taken in the country, and we went towards the monopolization of the energy sector, with a lot of control centralized at head office and centralized by Eskom. During this talk, I'm going to declare, as a public platform, that I'm not a whistleblower, even though I've been given privy to a lot of sensitive information. I'm not a whistleblower. I refer exclusively to publicly available information, and I'll share this presentation with everyone afterwards, with all of the publicly available links that link to publicly available information that's still online, that points towards the narrative that I believe is the correct narrative, and what is actually going on in truth in the country, and what has taken place. The reason why I say that is I care for my health. For one, we know what's happened to whistleblowers lately of Eskom. And for two, the information is actually out there already. It's not too difficult if you know where to look to find the information, and you'll see the information I'm referring to when I'm going through this. But it's difficult sometimes to connect the dots, especially if you're just in the public and you're trying to figure out what's going on in South Africa from the news. I see a lot of PR efforts going on from the government. The first PR effort was to distance itself from Eskom and to try and blame Eskom. Thankfully, that failed. People recognize that it's the government that was very much in control of Eskom this entire time that has led to the failure of every single SAIEE in the country. So there's certain PR efforts that are going on right now, and narratives that are being pushed that are not aligned to the truth of what actually happened. So I'm here to be a trusted voice in the marketplace, I believe, and provide some truth and some insights into what kind of happened and what's going to happen going forward. How did I come to be called an energy expert? It's The first time I was on the news asked to give commentary about what's happening with load shedding, broker went and looked at my LinkedIn profile and saw that I called myself an energy expert, and then declared that I was an energy expert on the news. And so therefore, from then on, I am now officially an energy expert because the news said it's the case, and we know that everything that's on the news is the truth. And so that's from May last year that I've been referred to as an energy expert, and then I've been growing into that role and being able to have the opportunity to comment on the news and radio and articles about the energy sectors turned out to be a passion that I didn't know I had, something that I really enjoyed doing, and just being able to point towards what really did take place and what is going to happen going forward is something that I value the opportunity to have. So I value also the opportunity to present to you today, and very much looking forward to the discussion towards the end of this presentation, the last 20 minutes, to hopefully learn from you, the real experts in the room regarding in your roles regarding what you're seeing. So yeah, my role was head of business intelligence, currently just moved to now public relations of Home Energy, and Home Energy itself is South Africa's solar marketplace platform for residential and businesses regarding rooftop solar. And our mission is to accelerate the global clean energy transition in the fight against climate change. And please keep that in mind when I give my talk, because some of the things that I say will kind of almost seem to be from the coal camp, and maybe put me in the coal camp in some respects regarding climate change and the renewable energy transition that's happening. But very much so, I'm in a company that's actually accelerating the clean energy transition. So I kind of walk the middle line. And I've put a link to my dissertation in this slide. So if you're keen to go into a business case of why we had to unbundle, in my opinion, and kind of the things that I saw, I got to interview Jan Oberhauser, the CEO from Eskom in 2018. I got to interview some very high-level executives at Eskom at the time. And the one interesting takeaway that I got from that, the kind of key thing that I saw, was that each of them were looking at Eskom very differently in terms of what actually needs to be solved. So Jan Oberhauser was looking at it from the cost perspective, and it's how do we have Eskom functioning well when we're not able to have a cost-reflective energy price, and so we need to sort the finances out. And then talking to the lady that was the key interface person between the government and Eskom, she was saying the people of Eskom need to be addressed first, as she likened Eskom to a patient that's been in a car accident and is bleeding out, and we stop the bleeding in terms of the people to make the people feel motivated, to feel like they're doing a good service to the country, to address the demotivation from the Zuma era, and to help get a culture of collective moving forward towards a solution first. So first address the people, then look at things like the finances, and then look at the things like the maintenance regimes and things like that. So what became apparent was that each of the executives that are kind of leading their respective departments had very different ideas about what was actually needed. And that was itself an interesting key takeaway in terms of there wasn't one direction that was kind of aligned to in terms of how to fix things in Eskom. There was many different voices, many different opinions. And when you have that, you don't really have a priority that you go towards. You just have a whole bunch of not moving anywhere as people fight for what they think is the right thing to do. Cool. Let's dive into it. So if there's one key thing that I would like you to take away from my presentation, like the one sentence, if you had to like just remember one thing from my time with you, it's that load shedding and the price of electricity are projected to both double over the next 5 years. And I'm going to go into extensive detail into why I believe this and why this is a projection from our side, from my side. So load shedding and the price of electricity are projected to both double over the next 5 years. And already out the gate, this is very controversial relative to what's being published in the media constantly from the government and from a certain camp within the renewable space, like the Mark Swillings of this world, that say that load shedding is going to be a thing of the past from December 2024 onwards, a thing of the past. And then very much time will tell regarding that, because that is not what I see. I see the opposite. I see actually more load shedding happening next year and the following year than last year and this year. So I sit then in the coal camp side of things, I guess, in the energy experts fraternity with Chris Yillens. I don't know if he referred to himself as a coal camp person, but I sit in that fraternity regarding load shedding is going to be around here for the next 5 years. And I actually go a bit further and I say it's going to double, just to kind of indicate that load shedding is going to get progressively worse. And this slide I initially presented in January of this year to the media. Altered it a little bit, but the key takeaway was the same in January. And so I'll start off with just talking to the price of electricity. So not many people realize, but both Eskom and municipalities get a separate increase close to inflation year on year. It's now become a focus of the consumer increase that took place this year with City of Cape Town really in uproar that there was this the 17% increase that was implemented. Eskom confirmed to get 18.65%, 33% over 2 years. And not many people realize if you really go and look at your bill, actually, if you really go and look at your house bill, and you take a look at the amount you're paying kilowatt hour on average from 2021 to 2022, that there was a 17% increase, actually, when you look at it, because Eskom had their 9% increase, and then the municipalities get a separate increase, mostly because municipalities view electricity sales as revenue for the municipality and not as money that needs to get passed along to Eskom. And that's highlighted by the 63 billion rand that has not been passed along to Eskom from the municipalities. It is used for other things, and it can be between 50 to 80% of a municipality's total revenue collection is sale of electricity. And so that's interesting to note. So they get a separate increase because they need to pay their staff their increases that they get year on year without any fail, or yeah, they need to be able to pay the expenses that themselves are increasing year on year. So they get a separate increase, Eskom gets an increase, and it's not really communicated very well, and it's not really highlighted anywhere. Difficult to really find that information, but I've put the links here to go and take a look at where you can find that information if you are in doubt. So I see the increases further going forward, and just talk to that 33% that was confirmed over the next 2 years. When you have an increase of 15% year on year for 5 years, you end up with a 105% increase overall from the base. So because of compounding interests, compound 15% every time, you end up with double the amount of electricity over 5 years just with a 15% increase. And I see an average or above increase of 15% going on from 2025 onwards. So apart from the 33% that we already have confirmed, then further escalations going forward. Very difficult to say exactly this is the reason why, or to point towards specific data that will say this is the increase that's going to happen in 2025, because NERSA decides the price of electricity every 2 years and is not willing to give a projection past that, which I think is fantastically flawed as a country in terms of how we're going about things, as how do you capitalize a project really when you don't know what your revenue will be. So there's a whole bunch of risks that's been built into the models of the people that have financed the energy projects that are in the country, and that risk is going to need to be met with capital coming in because of the risk that was taken. So the first movers that have put down the assets, the renewable energy assets, mostly almost exclusively in the country, the first movers, they all want their piece of the pie because they took a lot of risk putting down large projects, capitalizing them over 20 years, over the life of the project, 25 years for solar farms, without really knowing what they would actually get as their price of electricity as revenue from 2025 onwards. So for the finance people in the room, I hope that I'm talking a language, but yeah, a lot of risk was built into those models. And the first movers that took the gamble of like, well, we know that Eskom is going to be able to produce power really too much from 2025 onwards, so we'll put down our assets now. They're going to want their money for taking that risk. So apart from that, there's the rising cost of coal as Europe and America and China increase their use of coal going forward. Interesting to see Germany especially fantastically increasing their use of coal and the price of electricity trickling there. England as well opening up their first coal mine for 30 years and like plugging into the the coal usage, while meanwhile telling us and other developing countries to go away from coal, do not use coal. To be clear, I do not think coal will come down in the next 15 years, but it's interesting that the nation shouting the loudest and providing the most funding to go renewable are using coal themselves. It's an interesting note. And our diesel that we fired 5 times more this year than last year to help curb load shedding during the winter months. We got confirmation from the CSIR, Roxanne Leroux on live TV mentioned that recently, that we utilized our diesel open cycle gas turbines 5 times more this year than last year to curb load shedding and try and make it look like things aren't so bad. With the 18% increase in diesel cost, that's going to increase the overall input costs of creating electricity and providing electricity, especially in the evenings. So that's now the cost of electricity and a kind of key takeaway for the medium term to long term, why we're going to have increasing cost of electricity. And I'm going to do one more slide on the cost of electricity, but primarily focus a lot on load shedding doubling. So in the medium term, what I see is the oldest power stations will be coming offline over the next 6 years. And I do not see this changing, despite what the electricity minister has been telling us, that we're going to extend the life of these power stations. No. One key takeaway from that, his Komati power station, the power station that was brought offline to have solar and wind and a bit of battery installed in it, he said at the time that 1,000 megawatts, the best performing power station at the time, was taken offline, and does not make sense to do that in the context of an energy crisis. That's what he said. And coming from Komati and knowing I stayed in the town Komati, I know that there was only one unit online that had a 70% EAF at the time when it closed down, and it was the only one that had been online for a good 6 months. The maintenance philosophy of these coal power stations that are coming offline has been, for the last 5 years, run to failure. Run to failure. So when you have a unit that goes offline because a mill had already had a catastrophic failure, or a forced draft fan or an induced draft fan had something going on, and it's like a certain cost, like 500 million or above, that needs to be spent in order to repair that unit and have it come back online. The philosophy is to not bring it back online, to leave it offline, to cannibalize that generating unit by taking the spare parts that are now represented in the unit and use it elsewhere to keep the other units online. And so it has not been a maintenance philosophy that is preventative maintenance or anything like that. It's a run to failure maintenance philosophy for the units. And when a coal power station has been run to failure for the number of years that these older ones have been run to, it's very difficult to bring them back. You basically have to gut them out, do a demothballing, unmothballing kind of efforts, put in new mills, new forced draft fan, new boiler, potentially even new generator, like maybe even new turbine blades. Like, it's extensive what you need to do in order to bring them back to their former glory. And that I do not see that happening. I do not see that happening, despite saying that we're going to close them down later than they were planned to close down. I see these power stations actually coming off in the next 5-6 years. And they represent 8,000 megawatts of combined capacity, about 4,000 megawatts of generating capacity of coal power in the evenings. They can actually provide power at the night during peak demand. And that's in the context of a peak power demand of 32,000 megawatts. And I'm going to go a little bit faster because I know I've blabbed on a little bit on these slides, but just looking at the price of electricity, we saw recently in this Daily Investor, like I put the links here, the price of electricity increased about 450% since 2008 from Eskom's side. And once again, I do see it increasing about 15% annually going forward from 2024 over the next 5 years on average. Yeah, I'm happy to come back to this if there's questions, but I'm just going to go relatively quickly. Peak electricity demand occurs in the evenings. This graph is difficult to find online, I think because it betrays the story of how we do not provide power for the nation using solar farms and wind farms, because for the peak demand, because it happens after the sun has set. And wind is intermittent in nature, so it provides power when there's wind is blowing. But basically, we have a peak demand in the evenings. And interesting things to note and keep in mind here, look at the 36,000 megawatts that we were able to serve with a good 2,000 megawatt margin in winter in 2015. Good to note. 36,000 megawatts, 2015, it's been 8 years. What are we able to serve at the moment? We will find out. Our load shedding that we have is a factor of not being able to meet the peak demand. And so when we have load shedding, it's 1,000 megawatts that's shed, and for each stage of load shedding, and it's our inability to meet the peak demand that dictates the level or the stage of load shedding that we're on. So we've seen recently when stage 6 came back, predictably after winter, that stage 6 is just implemented the whole day, even though they have a dip in the middle of the day, that they could go down to stage 4, stage 3, like they've been doing recently. It's the inability to meet the peak electricity demand that dictates load shedding happening and the level of load shedding. I think put a note on this one, because what we're going to see going forward is, instead of just stage 6 going throughout the day, we're going to start seeing things like stage 6 in the evenings, stage 3 during the day, stage 6 in the evenings, stage 2 during the day. More solar is adopted both on small scale and large scale in the country. Great, so this information is really easy to find. I've put a link here, Eskom data portal, supply side, constant feed of accurate information from Eskom side. I took a peak demand recently from the 6th of this month. Just looking, and this peak demand was much higher than the other ones we've been seeing. But look at that, remember that 35,000 megawatts that we were able to, 36,000 megawatts that we were able to serve previously with a nice 2,000 megawatt margin. Look at this. 27,000 megawatts is our peak demand as a developing nation. Thermal generation, 17,800 during the peak. And what I want to point out here is that 80% of our installed capacity is from aging coal power stations. So this is the peak demand, 72% was from coal. From solar PV, predictably, the sun's gone down. Makes kind of sense when you think about it. There's no power being provided from solar during the peak demand. There's one concentrated solar plant, and then wind was actually blowing quite strong this night. We've got 6% from wind. It's quite commendable. But on average, from wind, you can expect 20 to 25% energy availability factor. So if your plant is rated at 100 megawatts, you do not get 100 megawatts from the plants. On average, you get 20 megawatts to 25 megawatts on average over a week or over a month. So when the wind is blowing at 100 kilometers or 60 kilometers an hour, yes, you can get 100 megawatts, but on average, you're getting 20 to 25% of the installed capacity. Interesting to note, whenever they announce energy projects in the media are saying 1,000 megawatts is coming online of wind, 10,000 megawatts is coming online of wind over the next 5 years. It's interesting to note that will then equal about 2,000 megawatts that's potentially going to be then providing power in the evening. And we see this happening a lot with Germany, with their 133 gigawatts of installed renewable energy, providing about 5 gigawatts during the evening peak. So a minuscule amount of renewable energy providing power during the evening peaks, and they're tripling of their price of electricity over the last couple of years. So, key takeaway, renewable energy does not provide power in the evenings consistently. And when we look at the aging coal fleet, we see a declining trend of the energy availability factor. This is now zooming out, a 6-year trend. It's constant trend, constant decline of our generation capacity. And this is synonymous with the aging of the coal power stations. They're typically designed for a 40-year lifespan, and they are then given a life extension of about 15 years when it comes towards the end of that, typically. But once you get to 55-year lifespan or 60 years, you really don't have too much further that you can go, apart from just completely gutting the power station, as I mentioned, and replacing everything. So those 5 power stations I mentioned are nearing their 55-year end of life. And the implication of that is a whole bunch of the large plants were designed to last until this time and then kind of all failed together. There wasn't like, we're going to put the mills in that'll last 20 years, but our turbine will only last 5 years. No, they were all kind of like, well, it's going to aim for the 55 end of life. We're going to decommission on this date, which we confirmed back 20 years ago, 15 years ago. These are the ones going to be decommissioned first. This is when we're going to aim to decommission them. Very difficult to extend those. So I do not see this trend reversing. And if we take a click down into what's going on, especially since the electricity minister came and joined us, this is now a click down to the last 3 years. So in 2021, the highest year, 2022, the middle year, and then 2023 starting there, and August. This is the energy availability factor. So sitting at about 55% currently, but starting the year under half. So that means of our install capacity, only about half was actually able to be delivered. So key takeaway here, energy availability factor trend is currently at its lowest point in the history of South Africa and continues to decline. Key takeaway, lowest point in the history of South Africa. I do not see this turning around and fantastically getting up to 70% or whatever 65% was said it's going to happen by March next year. I see it maybe plateauing a little bit, but already we're in a very bad place in terms of being able to service our power. So I'm building up a case here. This is it's an evidence-based case for the conclusion that I'm getting towards. So the end dates or decommissioning dates were confirmed November last year for the power stations. Commodity did come offline. So these power stations, this is the publicly available information. These are the ones that Sputler says are going to be extended. I do not see that happening too much, maybe 2 or 3 years, but already their EAF is very low. Yeah, so it's there. It's publicly available. These power stations are coming offline, and not much is going to change. We this last week got confirmation from Eskom that things are bad and that there's going to be consistent load shedding above stage 2 for the next 12 months. So like in the short term, load shedding is going to be here. I just zoomed in a bit. Basically, this is a graph of every week or a table every week of the year. So zoomed in and just showing that likely risk scenario is that we're going to have stage 2 or above. When we look at how load shedding has gone over the last little bit of time, this is what we see published. This is the Eskom's push data published in MoneyWeb. We see that there was a tripling of load shedding between last year and the year before. So in terms of hours, there was a tripling of load shedding taking place. And so it's really the breakout year in terms of the length of load shedding. I don't like measuring in hours because on this graph, 24 hours of stage 6 is the same as 24 hours of stage 1. And as we've heard, stage 6 costs the economy about 899 million rand per day. Stage 4 costs about 300 million rand per day. So there's an exponential nature to, as you go to higher stages of load shedding, there's a worse impact on the economy. So I much prefer measuring in gigawatt hours. And it's a very simple, easy calculation to make. If you have 1 hour of stage 1, you have 1 gigawatt hour because each stage is 1,000 megawatts of 1 gigawatt for 1 hour. So it's 1 gigawatt hour. 1 hour of stage 6 equals 6 gigawatt hours. When we measure in load shedding in gigawatt hours, we see that there was really a quintupling of load shedding between last year and the year before. So unserved energy, as you can put it as well, quintupling. And we had an average of stage 2 last year. If we want to use an analogy, in 2019, when you thought load shedding was bad, we were going the height of a 2-person plane. In 2021, when you thought load shedding was bad, we were going the height of Boeing 747. And last year, when we really saw that load shedding is bad, we were going the height of a rocket ship in terms of our altitude. And yeah, stage 6 returns with a bang out of winter. Some takeaways of why we were able to have stage 0 at some points during winter is that 4,000 megawatts was taken offline from industry in order to prepare for potentially stage 8 that was going to take place. And so there was 4,000 less megawatts. Planned maintenance has increased from 3,000 megawatts in June to about 6,000 megawatts in September, which roughly equals 3 stages increase. And then we had stage 6 come about because of breakdowns at power stations as well and delay in bringing back service. One thing that to speak about the stage 0 that we had was that we also heard from Eskom that they're seeing now 4,400 megawatts of installed PV in country on their side in terms of the demand comparatively, doing analysis on their demand profiles. So that's very interesting to see, and that would have then contributed to 1 or 2 stages less load shedding taking place, primarily during the day, but also a little bit at night, because solar PV installation will not work during load shedding unless you have a battery connected to your inverter. I mean, you could potentially use a generator, but that's a very odd design, not really seen. So from our side, we're seeing primarily that 90% plus of our installations of solar are paired with a battery, because you do not get load shedding protection unless you have a battery paired with it. And so when you have your battery paired, it means that in your evening, you can use your solar power that you've been collecting during the day to power your home at night in order to make your electricity bill come down. So there is an aspect to solar installations reducing your evening peak demand, less so during the day, but in order for the home and the business to become efficient, if the business is operating at night, they'll be using their battery as much as they can in order to reduce their electricity bill. And so, yeah, what I see going forward, I've spoken about what kind of has happened. The energy situation is deteriorating and will deteriorate in the short to medium term. Some of the revelations over the last 12 months is that there's been lack of maintenance, and grid infrastructure as well has been really taking a hammering. Distribution infrastructure has not been maintained. There's a lot of theft, vandalism, and grid instability as a result. We also heard from Andre de Ruyter, first time ever that a CEO has given such insights into Eskom, that Eskom is basically a feeding trough, and he inferred 2 ANC ministers' involvement. I'd be interested to hear if anyone has heard who those 2 ANC ministers are, even though he gave the names directly to Pravin Gordhan. Very interesting to see that it's not discussed in the media. Very interesting to see that no one has really named those ministers, even though he very publicly indicated that he has told a lot of people who the names are. I know who they are, but I'm not going to say, and so I won't say to anyone because I'm not a whistleblower. But it's very easy to find out and figure out if you read his books and read the comments. You can also hear from John Steenhuisen in Parliament talking about who the ministers are. He very much was very public in declaring who they are, but I'll just stay away from that commentary. When we look at our new power stations, they've been doing terribly. We're not going to go too much into the Chancellor House owning 40% of Mitsubishi Hitachi at the time that Mitsubishi Hitachi won the entire contract for Medupi. We're not going to talk about that too much, but it's something to note, interesting to note. Chancellor House, of course, being the investment wing of the ANC, officially declared, confirmed 2 years after it was denied that the ANC was using it as an investment house, but interesting to note. So Kusile Unit 1, 2, and 3 out for a year. They say it's going to come back in October. We'll see. Maybe it'll come back in December. We'll see. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with Kusile. But I do not hold much hope for things happening with excellence anymore from Eskom generation. I'm going to really speed up now because I'm looking at my time. I've got 20 minutes left, but I still got a bit of content to go through, so I'm going to talk really fast, faster than I usually talk. But yeah, energy availability factor, we see that's been declining under 50%, consistent decline. We had a failure of the REIPP bin windows. Bid window 5 failed by more than 50% to reach financial close. One thing interesting to note there is that 12 projects that failed, pretty much all of the projects that failed were from Incumbent Consortium, which was the one that was partnered with African Energy and Power, the brother-in-law to the president's company. And I don't know quite what to make of this. I think it was maybe an unfortunate event. I haven't figured out, and I don't really have a strong opinion about this, but it's interesting to note. It's interesting to note. For me, it's interesting to note. The president's brother-in-law was involved in half of the bin window, and they all failed at the same time. They came from coal. So I don't know what that means. I'm still figuring that out. If someone can like DM me or email me and be like, oh, I actually know what the reason is and why this took place, it'd be very helpful for me to understand. But I'm confused by this. It's confusing. It's maybe just happened, unfortunately. Maybe it was a victim of circumstance that took place with the Ukraine war and the financial environment shifting against renewables during this time. But bin window 5 was held up to be one of the solutions to our load shedding going forward, and it failed. Bin window 6, remember bin window 6 last year, July, Cyril, when he announced his energy crisis response plan, I'm going to take 2,600 megawatts capacity up to 5,200 megawatts. They're going to double the bin window 6, failed by more than 50% due to grid constraints. And this is predicted to lead to 10 years of load shedding going forward by the CSR, by Roxanne LaRue. So what does this mean? My projections are that load shedding will double off of the base of 2022 over the next 5 years. So doubling, this is what it looks like, load shedding doubling from the base of 2022. And what that means is that we're going to have stage 6 average in 2027. And the reason why I put a UFO here is not because of impending announcements from Joe Biden in the US, but it's more because we don't know what this looks like in South Africa as yet. We have never experienced this. We don't know what stages they're going to go up to. Maybe stage 16 for a day or two, maybe stage 12 as a peak. But we don't know what this looks like. And it's a very scary future. And this projection was made in January, basically, that we're going to have 50% more load shedding this year than last year. And unfortunately, I'm sad to admit that my projections were wrong in that they were conservative, overly conservative. This projection is a conservative projection because this amount was already met and exceeded in August this year. So we have hit our average of stage 4 already, and we've had 50% more load shedding in 2023 from August already this year. So this ended up being a conservative projection. It's going to be interesting to see what the projection holds up against going forward. But yeah, 5-year projection in January, I can't really change it too much because that would be cheating. But I'm going to stick by this, and we're just going to track to see what actually does take place. But it's interesting to note, January I made this projection, and this is what happened. So,
Matthew, sorry to interrupt. If you can sort of go to the critical points. We've got 15 minutes overall. I'd like to allow enough time for questions. So if you can just watch that, thank you.
I'm going to run straight through then. I'm going to like even talk to each slide. But basically, we've done, in terms of the market sizing is substantial. We did a bottom-up analysis with LiDAR data, airplanes flying overhead, roofs, counting the major metros, counting the number of homes, the size of the roof, the orientation of the roof, and overlaid that with financial data for each home to determine what is the most appropriate solar solution for that household, and what is then the number of inverters, panels, and batteries. Sum them all up. Basically, the key takeaway is it's 1 trillion rand as the market value. That is, if everyone that could get solar did get solar for their house, it would equal 1 trillion rand in terms of the product price. And then the service obligation markets, the people that actually will most probably get solar is a bit less, and home energy share of market that we're going for is 40%. So, yeah, this was a bottom-up study. It's the first time ever that a bottom-up study has been performed in South Africa like this, and it's hard data looking from different perspectives. So it's roofs, and then segmentation by income class. And yeah, I'm going to keep this confidential in terms of how it exactly looks per province. But the key takeaway is that 1 trillion rand is the value of batteries, solar panels, and inverters. That doesn't include the cost of labor and SDG and things like that included, but just for the products alone. And just to prove that we have the information cross-sectional, there's the classes and then the different segmentations as well. And we will be releasing, I'll be releasing a solar industry white paper in Q4 in partnership with these industry bodies, Green Cape, Sapia, and UCT, that talks to this information, so it'll become publicly available. There'll be the one piece of information that can be pointed to as this is what the solar industry looks like in South Africa for residential states, or for the residential sector in South Africa. Okay. Very quickly then, what is going to happen to the load profile? And I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the term the duck curve or the duck curve phenomena, but this is what I see happening in South Africa as well as it has happened around the world. And here is our current load profile, where California was in 2019. And as solar gets adopted, we then have a dip in terms of the demand on your side. You see a dip in the demand because homes are getting their own solar power and using it for their home to power their home during the day. And then a slightly lesser dip or a decrease in the evening as battery is somewhat used and overall demand is decreased going forward. And this curve becomes more of a duck curve going forward as solar penetration increases. We estimated during my interaction with the presidency in March this year that there's about 5% penetration of solar across the country in the residential sector. We estimate from August that there was an 8% penetration. Very difficult to estimate accurately, but there was a 3% increase then in penetration between March and August due to the demand for solar being so high. So we still are very nascent in our industry. Just some more duck curves, and yeah. Going forward, home energy is positioning itself to become a virtual power plant provider. At the moment, we're just the marketplace. So for homes and businesses, we partner with energy providers, installation providers, solar providers. And where we're going towards is we're going towards a virtual power plant model. So Virtual power plants, like a smart grid, is scaled up. It coordinates the distributed energy resources and battery supply to supply the demand that's needed. And what we see actually happening is this taking place for city-states like Cape Town. So virtual power plants being able to connect the batteries in the different homes to power the municipality, even when the main transformer is switched off during load shedding. You can still have power distributed throughout the municipality from inside the municipality, from batteries, large scale and small scale, that are there present, and generation assets that are present inside the municipality. So once you get enough penetration, 20% upwards across the country, you can then have a global or national virtual power plant. But for city-states, we'll see it first in the city of Cape Town. When they get load shed, they can then, similar to Stellenbosch Dam, collect the energy from all of the solar installations and wind as well, potentially, and then distribute it throughout the metro, reducing their stage load shedding by 1 or 2 stages. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much. Happy to jump into questions.
Matthew, thank you very much. I would just like to boot up, and then we can go into questions from the audience. I think we'll focus on the questions in the chat first, and then we'll go to verbals. The market that you've estimated in South Africa, that's the status and the most recent change. Is that market for urban home? Sorry, there's a rural urban split in South Africa, and 70% is urban. Is that for the urban only group, or is that overall, all households in South Africa? Thanks.
So it's exclusively, thanks for the question, it's exclusively municipalities. So it's within the major metros where we got the really granular data, and then we expanded that out, extrapolated using satellite data. So exclusively within the municipalities, the 7.7 million homes that could accommodate solar in municipalities, so residential, not CNI, not commercial industrial, it's just for homes that are sitting in municipalities throughout South Africa nationally. It's those homes that we estimated for a total market value of 1 trillion rand for products. I hope that answers your question. Happy to answer a further clarifying question.
Thanks. I've got a comment here by Jana Breet from Transmission Planning. She says the head of the duct is reduced by load shedding.
Yeah, it was just an observation, Marcus. So yeah, I'm just going to bump in. Thanks for your presentation. Yeah, great effects in load forecasting and transmission. So I look at a lot of the similar things that you're looking at. But my experience was that quite a lot of our time of system peak values was reduced the past year, especially, and there's a strong correlation with the load shedding during that times. And I think it makes logical sense because not a lot of people because the duct curve really at this stage refers to pure solar inflow, but not necessarily batteries connected to it or not strong enough. And that's why you do get the influx back of the demand, and that's what causes the head of the duct to basically come back. But the reduction in that we see, I think, is purely because of the load shedding forcing the peaks down. Yeah. I mean, that's what we intend by the load shedding, because we can't meet the peak. So that's a big reason for this is not a battery operated taking the peak past or the solar past 6 p.m. This is mostly due to solar due to the load shedding reducing the peak.
Yeah. So I would say yes. I 100% agree with everything that you said. I would say that the duct curve is then more representative of the demand, what it would be if it could be served. So it's the demand that isn't met, with more what the duct curve is rather than what is met. And yeah, peak shaving is definitely coming about. A lot of different things happening to try and reduce the peak by doing demand response, things like that. But yeah, very much agree. Load shedding is bringing down the evening peak.
And it's actually this pattern. There's actually another curve. This is the duct curve. There's actually a canyon curve now as well. Don't know if you've seen it. There's someone that wrote a paper on canyon curve. So that is giving you like a serious deep fall and then a very strong ramp up rate. And I think that would probably be induced by if we do have people coupling their solar with batteries, you'll probably see that the charging of EVs and batteries during your peak time would increase. So you actually have an additional increase rather than a decrease on your peak. So you have additional increases due to the charging of your batteries. So when there is power, then everyone is trying to charge. And maybe when they get home, they're going to charge their EVs and so forth. So they'll be in. So that's with the assumption that there you go. There's the canyon curve.
Wow.
So,
Geez, thanks for this. This is
so
really
that's
helpful.
even worse from a planning perspective. That's even worse because you sit with a very low minimum demand and you sit with a very steep ramp up rate towards your maximum. So from a planning perspective, that's a nightmare.
Oh, and I can only imagine what this is doing to generation assets as well, because power stations aren't cycled every day like this.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it poses a lot of technical difficulty. It's not just the fancy, but even the duck curve. I mean, it poses quite a lot of technical difficulty. The implementation of microgrids, virtual plants that you're saying, from a utility point of view, we sit with the main challenges is what is the demand that we need to meet? What part of, you get a lot of people that is connected to the grid, and you get a lot of people implementing solar, but still staying grid tied. So that actually creates a whole new dimension for utilities to cope with, because what is the actual demand that the utility should keep on servicing if it's not the entire country's load anymore? However, quite a lot of people say they're going off grid, but they're not really going off grid. They still use the grid as backup. And that creates a whole new, I mean, technically it creates a whole new ball game, because now you have to be able to meet those peaks, but no one is using your energy, which is feeding your revenue during the middle of the day.
Yeah. And at the moment, we actually highly recommend people to just cover 80% of their demand. Just to add to that, and what we're seeing on our side, we say financially it makes the most sense to almost use the grid as a battery itself, and just take care of 80% of your energy needs with your installation, not go off grid, because you need to oversize by 3 times, taking care of 80%. And that's a very fortuitous position for people that can go solar right now. But it will change when we start having the time of use tariff implemented on the residential scale.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure if anyone. Go ahead.
Which is what makes sense from a business point of view from the utility side. So it seems unfair by raising your prices during that time, but surely for covering cost, if you're only going to use the grid for 20% of your time, the entire structure changes, and obviously your payment structure needs to change. And I think that is maybe a mind shift that a lot of the residential users still needs to do, is to understand the implication of the cost change and why it needs to change to be viable for both user and utility.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of pushback to that, but out of interest,
for sure.
Is any hazarding of a guess to when time of use will be implemented on the residential scale?
No. Listen, there's already there is time of use tariffs at this stage, but they're not signaling such strong signals as of yet. I mean, there's not such a big difference to really show away people during the midday or during peak hours. So it's still something that's very much up for debate. I don't think that's cleared out. It's just from a logical point of view, it makes you think that things needs to be reset. And it also does not make sense for Eskom just to rise the current tariffs, and then by doing that, you're actually increasing this duck curve problem. Because you're making it more viable for customers to actually go solar. But in the same, so the tariffs is not, they're not designed correctly at this stage. Even though they do have a time of use component, they're not designed optimally to service both customer and utility.
So you say time of use, that's super interesting, and that's part of why I love being on this kind of chat and chatting with people like you. So time of use is, you're saying it's implemented, I didn't know this, on a residential scale. That's super interesting, because I don't see that. Is that for smart?
No. Listen, I'm not into the tariff department, so I'm not going to take responsibility for full. But there is definitely some of them. I'm not sure if it's fully residential. Hey, I don't think it's really residential. It's much more on the industrial side. But I mean, there is a time of use tariff that is being used, but I don't think it's generally being implemented throughout residential as of yet. Yes.
No. I mean, it would be great to make it 8 rand, 10 rand per kilowatt hour in the evenings. It would be awesome, because that would just really incentivize a whole bunch of people to get batteries and then provide power in the evenings to themselves and to the nation. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's why I say. So the entire structure needs to be redesigned and also understood by all parties. So we need to somehow get that right.
Over the next 5 years.
Definitely.
Folks in the audience, I see names that I recognize. Lungile, Solani, you're also involved in tariff improvement and so on. You're welcome to interject here. I do know that Eskom is looking into broadening the residential time of use, and hopefully in a future talk you'll get folks like Shirley Salvodi from Eskom in to talk to that. Matthew, you said two things recently. The one was you hinted at the revenue squeeze on the municipal side, and then a further question, if you can just talk to it, is where do you see, we know that residentials are 30% of the evening peak, roughly. Where do you see the conversion of residentials actually stopping? We talked about the market and this huge import, and that this is starting to appear on the system. Where do you see it potentially as stopping? You've done your market research, so there's two things: that the tariff squeeze, and what are the limits on the conversion of domestics to solar? Thanks.
Great. So yeah, the tariff squeeze is something that I think hasn't been sorted out and kind of thought about too much on the local level. And I see it as potentially one of the reasons why there's been such a delay in actually implementing the SSEG platforms and processes and getting them up to speed in municipalities, because they're not really incentivized at all. They're actually almost disincentivized to get the SSEG process up and going and have, like, this is the communicated, publicly understood method for confirming that you're getting a solar installation and getting approval for that. Like in Cape Town, Cape Town's like 5 years ahead of every other municipality, in my opinion, in terms of how they're going about talking to the public, informing them, structuring the SSEG application process, having a platform, actually replying and processing the paperwork, or actually, first of all, not going and doing paperwork, but doing online submissions. A lot of municipalities still sitting with paper if they've even implemented SSEG at all. So I see it actually as just kind of a slow crash of the Titanic taking place into the iceberg in terms of the municipalities and SSEG and their revenue squeeze. It's just going to happen. They're just going to have a utility death spiral take place on a small scale, where as the price of electricity increases, the higher end users that would usually supplement all the other users go off using that much electricity, and they just lose revenue. So like a decline in the revenue is what I see actually happening on the national level. I'm happy to chat a bit more about that. And then, sorry, if you can just clarify your second question. I was just focusing on a bit much.
The revenue crash was the one thing that I was interested in, and whether it's getting a lot of discussion.
No.
Then the other thing was, what is the potential for solar home systems? We think that there were about 450,000 in at one stage. Then perhaps 2 years elapsed, and you said maybe 3% were added, so that might be 700 odd thousand that are in right now. What do you think that potential is actually?
Okay, thanks for the question. So part of the work that we did with the scaling solar financing work group with the presidency, that we were invited. So I was the exclusive representative from the private sector in that work group, and we were invited to provide a commentary and inputs, and we were invited due to our relationship with Nedbank. So we were talking with the presidency about what we're seeing. We then invited Go Solar, Andrew Middleton, to one session to provide his input. And he was asking, where do you get the solar penetration of 5%? It was very difficult to get solid information about solar penetration. It is very difficult in the country, mainly because there's no way to actually register on scale correctly the number of, there's no way to really count the number of solar installations that has taken place until now. I'll go into why I say now. So the SSEG system, complete failure to try and determine this penetration, because less than 5% of, in my opinion, less than 5% of installations have actually been registered with SSEG nationally. In Cape Town, I'd say like 20%, 30% of the installations that are here have actually been registered. You can't do it through any kind of municipal logs. If you even had access to the data, You can't really do it from Bucky Brigade installers or installers. Why would they give that information to anyone? There's no database where they would go like, I registered this house and put a solar installation on their house. Like COC, yeah, good luck searching the COC database for solar installations. So it came down to a whole bunch of different data points that pointed towards a less than 5% penetration in the marketplace. And that was in March that we gave that information over to the government, and they took it verbatim and presented it, saying there's less than 5% penetration in the country. So it was a host of different things. So we looked at imports, we looked at the difference between C&I and residential in terms of the estimated number of installations. And we looked at the number of what we could tell market players and their volumes of how much installation capacity they have per month. Go Solar giving a lot of good information there. Thankfully, Andrew Munson's very good at collaborating and helping with expand the market. So we talk to them quite often, even though he's our biggest competitor, Go Solar, and the market leader in terms of number of installations. Just key takeaway, they're doing about 1,500 installations per month. Recently, before the dip, and there was a dip in winter where they went down to about 500 installations per month on average. So when you look at those numbers, it's difficult to get past 5% penetration in March, and then difficult to get more than 3% penetration of the 7.7 million homes by this point, by August this year, or now September. So it's now 8% or less, that we would say. And the reason why I said now is we're actually in the white paper, thankfully. We are now going to include the LiDAR data, which has captured the number of homes and number of solar panels on homes across the 7.7 million homes. So we actually will have the bottom-up counted data of the number of homes and number of solar panels that have been installed on homes. And that will be included in the information that we release in the white paper. And hey, there's lots of space here, a lot of white space for SAIEE to join. It would be actually really cool to have you as collaboration partners so you can get first-hand information and get the raw data to work with, not just the aggregated data that we'll be presenting in the white paper. So just came to mind, we get to collaborate with you on this and share the data with you when we get it of the actual bottom-up information regarding penetration. So yeah, if you're happy, I'd like to add you guys to the collaboration partners. So let's start that conversation, and if that's possible.
Matthew, thanks. We will certainly have a whip around within SAIEE and come back to you on that. That's
awesome.
Much appreciated. Yeah. I love that offer.
Great.
Thanks. At one stage, we had a chappie in remote sensing called Hal Wooding of Hal Wooding Associates, who was looking at detection of various things, and solar panels was one of them that came up, and these guys are doing a lot of LiDAR work and so on. But awesome. The point was using AI, trained AI to detect panels on roofs from solar, from aerial survey. I've popped the link in the chat box if it may be at all of interest to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds really good. Cool. Which company do you work with?
Here's Hal Wooding Associates, something like that. But you can just check that. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, we are at the end of time. If there are any questions, Lungile, I'm looking specifically at you with reference to the revenue crunch and what might be done about it. If you have any questions or comments, please jump in now, folks in the audience.
Marcus, maybe a comment from my end, coming back to the penetration of SSEG, what we have seen with some of the projects that we do, we find that the registered projects, take for instance in Bito, they had on their registered, I think 20 or so projects. And based on the analysis that we did, we picked additional 120 projects. Similar case in Stellenbosch as well. So we need to work better on the registration process, because most people are not registering because they feel the process is tedious. But that's certainly something that we will need to work better on.
Tselani, that this is about the formalization or normalization process of getting these projects up and registered. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Matthew, is there something that the solar industry could or should be doing to sort of accelerate or accentuate that, or does your duty stop there?
So yeah, that's a good question. On our side, we actually do application for all of our clients because we recognize the importance of complying now rather than later when the compliance becomes forced. And so we see that those that don't have the SDG application in place will really suffer when SDG becomes a requirement, and the municipalities start going back like Cape Town's starting to do. For example, Cape Town flies overhead and looks at the roofs and sees the panels and then goes to the homes and be like, hey, we don't have an SDG application for you. Here's a fine for you, first of all. Second of all, get it in line, otherwise you're going to shut your system off. And also, where's your COC for that? And also the system doesn't look like it's installed correctly, plus the inverter's incorrect. So you need to get a different inverter, so go and spend a whole bunch more money getting an actual trusted solar installer like Home Energy to come do it for you and get your solar installation in line. There's going to be a lot of pain for people that have not installed with an SDG application, either pending or have been approved. And what's sad is that there's not really any knowledge within the installation community, just the installers themselves, never mind the people getting the solar installations, that they actually need to register their installation with a municipality. It doesn't really fit in with the thinking at all. It's just like, I'm doing my own thing on my own house. Why do you care? I don't trust the government. The government just wants to give me a different tariff. There was all this talk, even under the radio, saying we need to charge them 10 times more, people that get solar in the evenings. So it's almost like, if I tell the government that I've got a solar installation, I'll actually end up paying more electricity with my solar installation than before the solar installation because of how much they're going to charge me now, because they've realized that I'm rich and I can actually get a solar installation. So there's that kind of thinking that we're seeing of like, people in the market, people like don't trust the government. They don't care what the government wants to think and do. Similar to the e-tolls that no one complied to, like less than 80% of people complied to. So it's like, 80% of people did not comply to e-toll, and then e-toll failed fantastically. So that's what could happen potentially with SDG, especially when municipalities try and actually roll out enforcing SDG. We're not sure. I don't have too much opinion, but from our side, we do ensure that SDG is complied with because we understand the importance of it. Plus, we want to start feeding back into the grid, which is what's going to be. You need to have SDG in place to do that. As part of our play towards virtual power plants and providing power for a municipality from the assets within the municipality, SDG needs to be in place for each of those distributed energy resources. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or I provided the answer there. I'm happy to go further.
Thanks. It's certainly clarified. I'm very interested. We're looking to processes that will make life easier for planners of the future. And if they understand who and how many, the scale and the shape of the modifier, then they can make plans appropriately. But right now, if there's no information for them to draw on, it's really tough. Yeah. Ciro, I see you in from Cape Town. You're welcome to add your comment. I've got nothing from Ciro. Matthew, then thanks. If there are any final comments from anybody in the audience, you're welcome to question or comment. You're welcome to do it now. Otherwise, we will thank Matthew and close off.
Great. Final comment from my side. Now that you say that, it actually would be very good to communicate about the white paper, even if we can just be having as a reviewer, because we can then actually share the information per suburb of what the penetration looks like currently and what we estimate the penetration will be per suburb going forward. We're going to be estimating what is going to be the 2B states of solar penetration, and that information actually can be very valuable when making decisions and planning for the future, because I think we are the exclusive owner of this information in the entire country, of this data. It was very expensive data to get. It was combined LiDAR data for the major metros, Gauteng, Cape Town, and KZN, and then satellite data was used to extrapolate for the rest of the country. And that data set is so expensive that we were the only company to purchase it for this use, for estimating solar residential penetration and the total value. So I think that there is actually a really good reason for us to work together regarding that data, because it could be very useful for you. And from my side, thanks very much for the opportunity. yeah, happy to present again at some point in the future. But thank you for the time.
Matthew, thanks. I would love to see, check back with you in future and see, whether this is going according to your estimates. Jana Brett from Eskom says, yes, she's very interested in that information for sure. So you can count us in, Matthew. We would love you on that, on the white, and participate. So, once again, thanks from me from a Load Research Chapter point of view. We really appreciate the time you've put into this and your views. And yeah, we look forward to making contact with you in future. So thank you so much. It's been
awesome.
Very interesting listening to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really value the opportunity to speak with you, and very much looking forward to the future relationship being developed. Great. Thanks, everyone, for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And thanks to those attending. Much appreciated. And for the lively chat, especially Jana and Wayne and so on. Thank you so much. And Solani. Cheers then.
Bye, everyone.